Fantastic. So as I said, welcome. And just to give you an overview of who IACD are and what we do. So IACD is based in Scotland, but we have members across more than 70 countries across the globe. We are accredited with the United Nations, and we do have representatives that certainly fly the community development flag at the United Nations on a regular basis. We have an international board of trustees that represent various regions across the globe. And for us, it's really important. The essence of IACD is to support community development practitioners, academics, and organisations around the globe to really lift the voice of community development workers, but also to challenge or encourage governments and organisations to come from the work that they do with communities from a community development lens, which is sometimes missing. We've seen over the years that we've moved more to a community engagement lens, which isn't community development. So our office is based in Scotland, and we are a registered SCIO, which is a Scottish charitable incorporated association or organisation. And we encourage our members to get involved. Like I said, we do have that. We do have a board of trustees that represents the various regions across the world. I encourage you to get to know your local trustee, and you can jump on the IACD website and find out who that is, and get involved in any way. I'm now going to hand back to Dee, we're going to do a little bit of a check-in. We're going to put you all in breakout rooms so you can just have a quick yarn with somebody. So Dee, over to you.
Thanks, Michelle. So welcome back, everyone. We know 6 minutes is not a long time, but hopefully you had a little bit of a conversation with someone. Feel free to put any insights, thoughts, anything in the chat there about what you hope to gain from today, what you'd like to leave with, or what you talked about. Could be just an interesting fact or tidbit, whatever it is. Add a couple of things to the chat if you feel like it. And thank you for having those conversations, have a bit of a yarn with each other. And I'll hand straight back over to Michelle. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Dee. So before we kick off into the international standards, and hands up if at the moment if you're using or have even read the standards. Put your hand up if there's a few hands going up, sort of some a little bit shakily going up. Okay, that's all right. Well, hopefully after today's session, you'll feel a little bit more comfortable and have a little bit more of an idea of what, how the standards can be useful for you in your work. But before we do that, if we think about what is community development, we like to think of community development as a practice, and it's something that's done by people. May not always be something that you're paid to do. You may be a community volunteer that wants to work for change in your community. You may be a professional community development worker. You might be an academic, or other professions that sort of step in and out of community developments. They wouldn't necessarily call themselves a community development worker, but they use community development principles and practices like social workers or community health workers and things like that. So it's very much a broad spectrum of people that are doing work across the globe that we would potentially call community development. But a few years ago, or actually many years ago now, IACD sort of crowdsourced a definition of community development from practitioners around the world. And you can see that on the screen there. So it's really talking about it being a practice-based profession and academic discipline. I would also say, as I said before, it's actually something that people quite often do in their communities without even knowing that they're doing community development work, just because they're wanting better outcomes for themselves, their communities, their families, etc. But it
Michelle, we don't
really
have
is
a
about,
slide.
oh, have you lost? Oh, sorry, I'm not sharing the screen. Thank you. I'll go back. Sorry, I forgot to reshare. So I'll just flick back to here where I was talking about that, but the definition here that I'm
Beautiful.
talking about. So you should all be able to see that now. Excellent. So it's really the core principles that we like to think of as part of community development is it's around that participatory democracy, sustainable development, human rights, economic opportunities, and equality and social justice in the work that we do through our organisations, through education, through programs and initiatives that we run around supporting self-determination in communities, whether it's communities defined as a place-based or a locality, or whether it's around identity and interest. And it's something that happens across all communities, regardless of whether you are in an urban or a rural setting. So yes, we've got there just the values that we talk about, and you'll see those 5 values really quite implicit in the standards as we look at the Dee will share the history of the standards, but we also then talk about how can we use those standards, and then we'll go through each one of them individually. And at the end, we'll give you an opportunity in a breakout room with a couple of other people to think about what might the standards mean for your work. So I'm going to hand over to Dee now because she was very much involved in the development of the standards and can give you a bit of an overview of the history. So over to you, Dee.
Thanks, Michelle. I'll just get you to go next slide. Thank you. So yeah, as Michelle said, I was around for a lot of this period of time, and it was a couple of trustees, one from the UK and one from New Zealand, who really started digging into this and having broader conversations around the globe about it. And it was kind of identified that apart from academia or universities, tertiary education, there was not a really clear understanding or definition of what community development was. There were certainly different definitions around the world and different organizations, different countries, but what did that look like from, you know, a global perspective? There's a lot of people, like a lot of you would know, who are community workers who, when they discover a community development framework, they say, hey, that's what I do. So we know that there's a whole lot of definitions and people who fall under this around the world. So the standards were developed in consultation with members and also at conferences. So as Michelle said, I was part of a couple of the really participatory workshops that were held at different conferences to crowdsource this information and get these responses from people. And to find those kind of guidelines of best practice that were relevant, you know, around the world. So at the conference in Maynooth in 2018 in Ireland, where Michelle and I were also there, this definition was officially adopted by IACD. And it's been since then that people have been as Michelle said before, not only working aligned to them, but also helping to develop people's individual organizational practice in communities. So as it says there, there's a continuing agenda for the adoption of these standards across different global regions. And even this morning, I was telling Michelle, Helen, who's on the call here with us, Helen and I are part of a forming conference for the state of Victoria in Australia. And I have suggested to them, let's bring the standards there and have a look as well, so
Yes,
people
yes.
can kind of lean into it, a little bit more. Next one, Michelle. So the standards are on the website, on the IACD website. They are in 15 different languages. And the other thing that I was certainly really proud of and part of this happening was that these languages were people who came forward and said, I'm really happy to help it be translated into my language. So this was not paid work either. This is from people's passion and love and interest of wanting to really support these standards to be globally adopted. So if your language is not on there and it's something you think you can help with, reach out. Next, Michelle. Thank you. So the standards for community development, and Michelle's going to go over them with you. It describes the knowledge, so people's individual and collective knowledge, the understanding, and as we know, anything that you start to get to know, you can deep dive into and have a deeper understanding. It's like an onion. We've got layers of it. The skills that are required, and they can also be very emergent. Like I said, there's people who, like even my mother, who's part of the Baptist church and the women's group, when I explain to her things about my work, she says, hey, that's what we do. And also she doesn't fully understand community development and tells people I'm a motivational speaker, but she gets the principles. So I think there's those differences as well. And then that commitment. So that commitment to social justice, to equity, to those really important foundational things that we all know and trust in and love and want to grow and develop. So the need to practice in a recognized, consistent and competent way. The standards offer us this. And Michelle and I have used them many times over the years. And it's also by using them and giving that feedback to IACD is where they can then develop and they can, iterate. So offering that feedback is really important as well. Next, Michelle? Or is there a next? Am I back to you? Oh, okay, there we go. I think I just started this. So yeah, the standards are meant to be a framework. So you can reflect on them, you can use them for action, for open discussions. We know some organizations who will use them, there's 8 of them, use them one by one. And it might be at a team meeting or in a community with a project. They might go through them one by one and really deep dive into them, or they could be guiding principles for a way of working. It's not meant to be instructions. They are guidelines, they're standards. There's something that you can play with, be flexible with. And like I said, feedback is always great. So, and as it says there, community development must be shaped by your context. So depending where you are. So when we're using the standards, it could be working with communities in training, which we've done many times, and could also help shape the projection of research. So I won't read over all these because I think I just said them, but developing organizations, staff, people, and communities. And there's the overview. Well, are you going to go into the rest, Michelle? Will I hand back over to you with this one?
If you want to just do the overview, and then I'll pull them apart individually if you like.
All right, cool. Well, Michelle's going to give examples. So I don't know how useful it is for me to read all of these out one by one. But if you're thinking about, as Michelle goes through, thinking about these 8, where they might show up in your context, what are things that might surprise you or challenge you? Where are those actions you might be able to take, next steps to understanding or acknowledging or reflecting or giving feedback on those? So you can see they're very broad, and I'm going to hand back to Michelle to go through them now. Thanks, Michelle.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dee. And we'll start by looking at theme 1, and they're not in any numbered for any particular reason. It's just so that it's consistent with what's in the standards publication. You will see in the chat, I've added the link for the IACD website, so you can download the standards in whatever language is appropriate for you. But I've also given you the link to the Rutledge publication. So again, IACD members from around the world worked on various chapters to give you sort of a more of an in-depth understanding of how the standards might be used. There's case studies. Both Dee and I were involved in different chapters. And but there's a whole lot of great knowledge there that will actually support the work that you do in the field. But first one there is the values into practice. So it's really important when we're community development practitioners, academics, or people that are using community development tools to really understand our values, the values of the work that we're doing, that underpin what underpins community development. So if we think about those values that we shared earlier, so around things like social justice, participatory democracy, and things like that, it's a process-based work that we do. It's not all about the results. It's about the journey that we go on with communities, and being really knowing that when we're working with a community, that we actually set down some values. What is it that we want to achieve together? What are the values that underpin this project or this program? And also as an organisation, what are your community development values if you're not just a purely a community development organisation? And understanding the application of all of the various processes and tools that you can use in the community development context. Oops, sorry, I just skipped a thing there. Backwards. Sorry, so engaging with communities. So the purpose of this standard is to actually understand that community development means you actually need to be working with communities. You need to engage with those communities, building relationships. And a colleague of mine and Dee's years ago said, the importance of building relationships before you need them. So making the work that we do in community relationship-based, not transactional. We're not in there to extract from the community. We're actually, as a community development worker, walking on a journey with community and engaging in that communication, and that really authentic communication is so important. And understanding the impact that you have, and also developing relationships with all stakeholders, getting everybody around the table. And there are many tools that we can use in those spaces, whether it's, some of the participatory democracy approaches, or art of hosting tools, asset-based community development. I always think that community development includes community engagement. Community engagement doesn't always include community development. So thinking about, how do we make that engagement with community as genuine and as authentic, and open and honest as we can be with communities. So theme 3, if we think about participatory planning, so ideally, all community development projects are co-designed with community. This isn't, we always need to remember, very colonial practice around community development was a lot of doing to community. We need to modernise our thinking around the way we practice community development, that community's on the journey for the whole duration. We don't roll up into a community and go, here's the project that we're going to do to make your life better. Because the project that you design without community may have absolutely no relevance to that community. So this standard is around reminding us that we develop our community development practice around participation and building partnerships, supporting community and building community agency. So it's a lot around capacity building as well. We want communities to be able to develop those skills so that they don't necessarily need to fly that expert in. And in Australia, generally the context is the expert is almost the person that lives at least 500 kilometres from where the work is being done. So do they really know that community? You know, communities, people that live in communities are the experts. They know what's important to them. So of course we want them in the planning. You know, we see a lot of bad practice, particularly by governments, where they might design a program in the capital, so in Australia's case in Canberra, and then decide that they're going to roll that out across the country, and then it doesn't work, and they tend to blame communities. Whereas if we actually have communities along on the journey, we actually get much more sustainable community development. Oops, I've missed. There we go. Theme 4, again, building on that participatory processes, is around organising for change. So as a community development practitioner, how do we enable communities to actually take collective action? We should almost be the cheer squad of the community, and maybe supporting them with tools that we've got in our toolkit that will help them increase their influence and access resources and support them to manage and deliver whatever it is that they're wanting to do. It's not always our role to lead that. So, it's supporting communities to be able to take that collective action and develop the skills. So, quite often as a community development worker, our role is around, supporting community to build their capacity. If they identify that they're not quite sure how to do this, or they'd like skills in governance or whatever it might be, it's actually us as the supporter, not the leader. Because remember, the people that live in the communities are the experts and you're their support team. So if we move on and think about theme 5, which is around that learning for change. So it's always thinking, I encourage you as a community development worker to always have that lens of how can the work that I do support lasting change? So how do I support this community to build the capacity so that they increase their confidence, they come to collective decision making, we actually facilitate that space where the community can learn together, because communities become more powerful when they can actually collaborate amongst themselves and lead their journey. So our work is to actually support communities to come together collectively to prioritise what's important to them, to consider what possible projects or advocacy might need to be done in that space, and help them develop their sort of action plans and things like that. again, we're on that journey. We're walking side by side. We need to really make sure that we check our own power and ego at the door so that we can actually facilitate that learning and sharing for communities. When we are doing our work, diversity and inclusion is so important. But so often I see youth projects designed by people my age. And whilst I'm a woman in my mid-50s and I think I'm young and I remember what it was like to be 14 and 15, man, those years are way past me. I should not be designing programs for young people. I need to look around the table and go, who's missing? If young people aren't the majority of the people at the table designing youth programs, I need to then, as a community development worker, speak with the community and go, how do we get young people involved? Who do we need to, speak to? Where do we need to go? If it means that we need to hang out at the skate park or the basketball court or go to the schools and things like that, that's what we need to do. So it's really about thinking about when we're working that we actually design and our work that makes sure that the people that need to be at the table are there. If you look around the table and everybody looks and sounds like you, that's not diversity. That's just you bringing your cohorts together. So we want to make sure that when we're working with communities, that the group that we're working is representative of the community, because that's how we're going to get change and support communities to build that, again, that sustainability. Inclusion, thinking about where do we have our meetings? Are we scheduling a meeting, a community meeting to discuss an issue in a building that a person with a disability wouldn't be able to access? Or are we scheduling all of our meetings during the 9 to 5 when most of the community is at work or at school? So how do they actually participate? We want to make sure that we're not creating echo chambers of the same people driving the work in the community, because when we have diversity and we support inclusion, we get a much richer result from the community. So, before you're doing anything, even if it's just sitting down, having a yarning circle, inviting people together to decide what it might be, think about how you set up that space. Where is that space? If you're working with a community that would much rather be under a tree having a yarn, then do it outside. Get to know the community, know what works for them, to encourage that diversity. Leadership and infrastructure is an interesting theme, and it's actually in the book that I was talking to you earlier. It was a book that the chapter that I collaborated on with Ron Hustedy from the USA, and we had lots of conversations when we were actually writing that chapter around, what does it look like, and quite often. We might see articles in papers that talk about what, the savior of the community, somebody that's led something. And I always question, is that true leadership if it's all about my ego and not thinking about how have we taken the community on that journey? So what does sharing power look like? And sometimes really understanding that even how you show up in community makes a difference. I spent a lot of years working in disaster recovery in Victoria, and I used to have to say to bureaucrats and politicians, when you're going out to a disaster affected community, don't show up in your power suit or your stilettos. Wear your jeans and your t-shirt and things like that, because sometimes a lot of times what you wear even indicates a power dynamic. So when we think about the leadership and infrastructure in our practice, is how are we supporting organisational and community development to promote diversity in leadership? How do we get people to check their power at the door? I remember years ago Dee and I were facilitating some work in country New South Wales, and it was being very dominated by a local councillor. And I had to pull him aside and say, you are here as a community member. So it would be really useful if you could just shut up and listen to the community for a while, because it's actually not all about you. And he hadn't even thought that it hadn't occurred to him that the way he was talking really showed a different power dynamic. So this theme is really about us thinking about how do we build the capacity and capability for there to be a leader in every chair in our community. How do we support that leadership development? What is the infrastructure? What are the, is it that we need to start to develop leadership programs? Victoria and Australia do it really well with their community leadership programs. And I know Helen on the call today has been very involved in them, and Lee has been involved in leadership development programs in Queensland and in the LGBTQI plus communities. So it's thinking about how do we support that. When we talk about infrastructure, it's the systems, that big systems change that actually allows for communities to be in that leadership role, and support this leadership development. Leadership isn't something that only people in paid roles should have. It actually sits with the community, and we need to share that power with community. And finally, number 8 is around how do we develop and improve our policies and practices. So this theme really encourages us as community development workers to look at how do we work? What are the practices that we use in our work? What are the policies that guide our organisations to make sure that the work that we do is actually evidence-based? Here in the Territory, at the moment, we've had a change of government, and when we think about working with young people and youth justice, evidence-based has gone out the window for the moment, in place of political diatribe. And is that, I always think, is that useful? Do we do more harm to communities if we're not actually coming from an evidence-based, we're not evaluating the programs and the projects that we're doing with the community in a participatory way? I'm working on a project at the moment where we're actually asking the community, what are the things that you want us to evaluate? What are the questions that we need to be asking? What does success look like for you? And we're asking that same question to our funders, to our stakeholders, so that we get a really rich evaluation framework. We also need to be able to analyse all those external factors. So, thinking about, are we being driven by misinformation and disinformation? Is what we're doing really about community development? And community development at the core of that is about community, about the people that we're working with. It's not about us. It's not about our organisations. It's actually not even about our funders. It's about working with communities so that we have that systematic change. So, sometimes thinking about if you're not working in an organisation that's purely focused on community development, if you're working for a local authority or a government or a bigger organisation, actually reviewing your policies and practices to make sure that they actually are underpinned by community development practice, and that they, we go back to, if we flick back to, I'm just going to take us back to the slide that Dee went through earlier. Are all of our policies and procedures underpinned by, sorry, I didn't realize it was so bad, these sort of community development values? Do we see participatory democracy? So is there joint decision making? Are we thinking about equality and human rights? And I tend to always think of equity rather than equality because it's a little bit different. thinking about self-determination rather than necessarily empowerment, because remembering that it's not our job to empower anybody. We can create the conditions to support empowerment. I like to think that it's building self-determination in those communities, and thinking about, sustainable development is the work that we're doing aligning with climate justice and those social and economic justice to make sure that we're having a really holistic point of view. So I encourage you all to think about how do your policies of your organisation, actually embed community development values? How do your practices encourage participation, encourage power sharing, encourage equality and diversity and those sorts of things? Oh, sorry. So that's a quick whip through the eight, each of the eight standards. And if you have a look at the guide online, it gives you a little bit more reading. And then, of course, there is the book that I shared with you. Sorry, I can see there's been lots of chatting, and I haven't actually had a chance to respond. So hopefully Dee's been monitoring that. But what we are going to do is pop you all into to breakout rooms for maybe about 15 minutes, just to have a bit of a yarn with the people, you're probably being groups of four. And I want you to consider the following questions when you're in that breakout room. So, how do or could you use the standards in your work? What might be some of the opportunities that have come to mind during this session? Or what are the challenges? You can sit there and go, oh, yeah, that sounds great, Michelle, but. So have a chat with that. What's that but? And how do you change that into an and in your group? And what could we do as a collective to help, develop your practice? And then we're actually going to come back and have a little bit of a debrief before we share some more resources with you. So, Dee, are you ready with the breakouts? Fantastic. Enjoy your yarn, and we'll see you back here in about 15 minutes. Well, welcome back, everybody. How did those conversations go? Would love for a couple of you to share, what you thought about the standards, or did you discuss how you might integrate them in your work? And I'm going to tap Cara from MGen on the shoulder, because I know her and Tom were really efficient with their time and sorry, Charity, her, Tom and Charity, and I think she's got some great nuggets of gold to share with us. So, Cara.
Yeah, so hello everyone. I'm Cara from Philippines. So I had the chance to talk to Tom and Charity and a while ago with Helen. So we come from Meralco Power Gen. So it's a power generation, one of the biggest in the country. And our perspective is quite different when it comes to the ones that are really more of a practitioner, really part of the social work, the community development, because community development to us is an element, it's a part of a bigger scope, which is why I'm really interested in the discussions, because I think there is really merit to make it more structured, review policies that we have, update them, be more mindful about, the progress of how things are. And I shared to Tom and Charity what struck me the most. I think it was said a while ago that we should not have the burden of empowerment, but allow a condition or an environment to make that happen. And I think that is one of the things that it's a change of mindset, because we feel really burdened on, doing everything from A to Z, when in fact, it's really, ensuring that the community themselves are part of it. And, they're part of the planning, they're part of the development, they're part of the monitoring, so that they feel that they also own it. So there are those practices that we're there, but I think we can still improve. So that's to us. And what we do in community development, we have what we call a mandatory from the government that we have to do, but at the same time, there are those advocacies that our company initiates without us being asked to do. So I look forward to this because IACD is new to me. I also, like Tom, I only heard it. I got the invitation and I look forward to the discussion. Thanks. That's
Fan-
it.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing, Cara. It sounds like you had a very rich conversation. Would anybody else like to share a bit of the reflection that they had in their breakout room?
I'll go. In our
Thank
breakout
you.
room, it was myself, Rick. We also had Jester, and we had somebody also from Powerbank. Sorry, the name escapes me. I'm not the best with names, but I think what we discussed was the differences of contexts, as well as the difference in terms of um, sectors. Because I come originally, and most of my working career, I've worked in the non-government sector before, and in the social enterprise kind of sector, which is, an emerging model of delivery of services. And now I kind of currently work in the local government sector. So it was interesting to see how the standards would translate across, because especially the NGO sector is, especially at local NGO level, there's a lot less red tape, and there's a lot less systems in place. So we found that, I found in the past anyway, and something that we commented on all the different contexts, it kind of makes it easier to kind of have standards, because then you can pull from them and go on and so forth. But that's different in the local government context, where you have a lot of, already red tape and systems in and so on and so forth, and kind of change can sometimes be a little more difficult to think about and take on board. When I think one of the challenges is that there's a pre-existing system in place, and now, okay, you have to change from one system to another. I think it's sometimes easier to slot something in where there's a vacuum than it is to kind of do out with the old and put in kind of new and try to reconcile between two worlds, so to speak. And so a lot of the conversation revolved around that. And then there was also the talk from the context of the Philippines with regards to, I think there's a lot more like economic development and far like more intimate kind of experience of working with people almost more directly in that context, which I think is probably different here in the Western context, especially at like a local government work, because there's almost like a separation and delivery of services for different service providers under different things. So it's an interesting space, I guess.
I think that's an interesting reflection too, because we quite often see, particularly in Australia in local government, economic development sits over here and community development sits over here, and half the time they never speak to each other. And it's like, actually, why can't it be like this? We need both, and both should be working together. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Would anybody else like to share a reflection? Helen, go for it.
Sorry, Cian, I keep saying that wrong, Cian and Madeline and Kathy were part of my group, but Cian's there. So yeah, we didn't get through all our questions because we were talking. But we talked. What was interesting is that it's being used in different ways and manifesting in different ways in each of our kind of work contexts. So one person was talked about that they've used the IACD standards, to develop an internal document around community development policy strategies type thing. And that was used as a basis to inform their local context and that policy making. We also talked about, the value, the kind of idea of community voice, lived experience, and the value of lived experience, and that experts in their own life idea. And that was a person who was working with a mental health community centre context, and then a local government context, and talked about kind of those knowledges and how, you know, there's kind of academic shared kind of heritage of knowledge in certain circles and other knowledges that exist as well, and this lived experience knowledge and understanding the value that they all play in growing and learning and developing was slightly interesting off conversation, and talked about, you know, how it appears in mentoring and peer mentoring. Yeah, really good. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Helen. And as part of the conversations that we host with IACD, it's all about this sharing. It's this, we want practitioners around the world to connect and share their experiences. So Dee and I, in all of the sessions that we've ever run, or the sessions that I run with Sissy, who's the trustee from Aotearoa, New Zealand, we always try and make sure that they're participatory. So you all get time to meet and chat with other people. So I'm going to again share my screen and hand over to Dee as we sort of start to come to the end of today's session. I have also put in the chat the link to IACD membership. So if you want to know more about becoming a member, please jump over to the site. But Dee, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thanks, Michelle. It's been a really interesting journey with IACD personally. I remember when I used to work at the University of Newcastle, God, well over a decade ago now. And when I first started there, so it would have been almost 20 years ago, ABCD was what I was applying, following, researching, doing. And I sat there one day in my office and I thought, I really like this strength-based approach, this asset-based approach. There's got to be others out there. And so I just put in Google, community development associations around the world, and IACD popped up. And so I got in touch with them immediately, and that kind of started my journey with them. And so over, you know, more than a decade now, I've watched these resources emerge, and they're getting stronger and stronger, and they are community and member led. We're all part of this. So the Practice Insights magazines, there are a range of different topics that you can access here for these when you become a member. There's special editions like a East Asia edition, a African edition, America's edition, but there's also topic specific ones. So there was one that was community development response to the COVID-19 crisis. Michelle and I edited an ABCD edition. There are ones on after each of the World Community Development Conferences. There's Community is the Answer, Poverty and Community Development. There's a whole lot of different editions, so that there's a lot of resources there. As Michelle also said before, IACD have published and contributed to a number of books. And when the standards were being written up as chapters, as Michelle said, she was part of one chapter, I was part of another one. And there was people all around the world who were combining to bring these chapters forward. We also started recording podcasts. So the podcasts on each of those standards for each of the chapters of the book is available, and they're rolling on to do a whole lot of other podcasts as well. There's also journals and other publications that you can get access to through IACD. So there's other organizations and associations around the world. There's Community Development Society, there's the Journal, there's a whole lot of different ones. And even in Australia, I'm part of one of the committee that is forming a Community Development Institute for Australia, which has come out of a group in Queensland that's starting to form, and they're starting to do some really good work together. So the other thing that IACD has always done really well is record sessions. So there's webinars, the masterclasses, and other online events that you can access the recordings to. And very similarly, they might be done by trustees of other areas that might be, you know, African specific or Oceania specific or something like that. But it could just be a very broad topic. Like Duet, he comes along to all different times and different topics in different areas, where he is in South Africa to coming to visit with us. So there's a lot of resources that you can tap into there. Next one, Michelle. Before you leave, it'd be great if you could put your phone up to this, or Michelle can put the link in the chat as well. So there's that QR code. If you could offer a bit of feedback to us for this session and get a bit of an evaluation. Thank you. So just in the chat, before we start to check out, share something from today's workshop that you might tell other people. So yeah, what's something that maybe was an insight or an aha or a question, anything like that. So please share something in the chat there that you might tell other people about. And I will hand back over to you, Michelle, to do the final wrap up. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dee. And I really appreciate Dee joining me today. And I see even now Dee's no longer a trustee, she's still a member and still keen to participate in. All members are encouraged to be involved in anything. If you've got questions, we've supported members that have been doing their PhDs and masters to be able to connect with people globally and things like that. So if you've got a topic that you're passionate about or you want to learn more about, please reach out to IACD. On the slide there, you'll see it's the website. I've been putting web links into the chat through the session, and also you can email us at membership@iacdglobal.org. And please, you know, suss out who's your trustee in your region, and please connect with them. But thank you all for your time. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Duet, enjoy a nice sleep now. And for the rest of you, we look forward to seeing you at another IACD session. And if there's a topic that you want to host, reach out to me. We're always interested in picking up a whole lot of different workshops, and that's how we develop the offerings that we have based on people going, I'm really interested in sharing my work, or I want to host a conversation. Last year we did conversations around colonisation and decolonising or re-indigenising our work. We've done it on, you know, LGBTIQ, so queering CD and all sorts of things. So please reach out to us if there's a topic that you want to connect with us around. But thank you all. Go well. Until next time, we'll see you later.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.